Charles Pellegrin is on his way back as well. In fact, he's already here. He's heading to London, though, today for the UK government's spring statement. What is this?
So, Stuart, the spring statement is basically a checkup on the UK government's finances about 5 months after the unveiling of the budget in October. Labour's finance minister, or as it's called, their Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, will speak to Parliament and share whether the government is on track to meet the financial commitments outlined in the budget. This will be seen as a test for Reeves and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who've been under significant pressure to fill a yawning public deficit in a context of unexpectedly subdued growth, higher borrowing costs, and international uncertainty. They're keen not to be seen as peddling austerity policies, but are also keen to keep international investors and bond markets on board with their policies.
So what should we expect to hear then, Sean?
Well, with Donald Trump's United States retreating from its defense commitments in Europe, London is now looking to boost its domestic defense spending to better guarantee its security. So British media are expecting for Rachel Reeves to boost that spending by £2.2 billion next year. That's over 2.6 billion euros. And in order not to widen the hole in public finances with this increase, she's looking to make spending cuts elsewhere. The government has already announced a tightening in the allocation of welfare benefits that it said should total up to £5 billion, 6 billion euros. But independent forecasters believe the government's calculations actually overestimate the efficacy of its reforms, and still more cuts are needed. So we'll see in her speech whether Reeves announces more changes to welfare later today. The civil service will also be facing cuts to its spending to the tune of about £2.2 billion, as reported in media. Reeves is expected to justify these cuts to angry MPs by pointing to the changing geopolitical context, not just because of the need to increase defense spending, but also because Donald Trump's attempt to overhaul the global trading system with tariffs could affect growth. A new forecast could have previous projections for GDP growth this year to just 1% of GDP.
So looking at all of that then, Charles, can we talk of austerity, do you think, in the UK?
Definitely a word that's being thrown around these days, but in spite of the cuts that will be announced, the initial budget back in October still injected significant amounts of cash into public spending. So this spring statement will be more described as a course correction. What's happening, though, is that Rachel Reeves has implemented self-imposed rules that limit day-to-day spending to what is raised in taxes. So with limited growth, this limits borrowing and encourages spending cuts, especially as she's so far committed to not raising taxes. This is a way to show bond markets that UK finances are under control and to keep a lid on rising borrowing costs, as you can see there, rising steadily over the past few months, even year, both in line with what's happened in the US since January and in Europe recently because of the financial strain on governments to pay more for defense.
Yeah, another one to watch. The markets, of course. How are they playing out at the open in Europe?
Well, let's have a look. The FTSE in London opening higher ahead of that spring statement, especially with fresh inflation data showing consumer price increases in February in the UK cooled to 2.8%. Investors will also be listening in, obviously, to that spring statement. The FTSE in London opening 0.4% higher.
Let's go elsewhere. We're going to take you to the US now. It's facing a chronic shortage, of housing, particularly of affordable housing.
And the main culprit is that there are not enough new homes being built. When America's housing bubble collapsed in the 2000s, it not only sparked a worldwide financial crisis, it also slammed the brakes on residential construction. Nearly 20 years later, builders have yet to catch up. Some are trying novel approaches to speed up the construction process. Bryan Quinn takes a closer look.
A suburban subdivision 2 hours southwest of Denver, Colorado. If the homes here look like they were built on an assembly line, that's because they were. They're the product of a modular housing factory, one that uses principles closer to those of an automobile plant than a typical construction site.
We have created a system that allows the homes to move every 4 hours. A typical site-built home has 30% waste. We're at about 3% waste, so a radical reduction of waste.
The houses here take less than a week to be built out to 90% completion before being shipped to their sites for installation. The company has cranked out more than 500 homes in less than 3 years. It's that kind of speed that the U.S. housing market needs. America is in the midst of a chronic housing deficit, whose roots trace back to the mid-2000s with the collapse of the subprime mortgage bubble that triggered America's Great Recession and a global financial crisis. Cash-strapped builders drastically cut back production and have yet to return to building the roughly 1.6 million new units per year the country needs to keep up with population growth. The result, a shortage of some 7 million homes and an affordability crisis. Home prices are up 60% over the last decade, while roughly 1/4 of renters spend more than half their income on housing. This nearby firm has its own take on speeding up construction.
This is a 3D printed home made entirely of concrete, and we print layer by layer utilizing a CAD file that we slice just like your desktop 3D printer, and we're able to make different designs with it, more curved walls, has an organic shape to it.
Increasing speed and cutting costs will be crucial to solving America's housing crisis, as will changing state legislation and local zoning rules to allow more construction to go forward.
Don't know how you feel about those 3D printed homes,
I
Stuart.
was just thinking about the dusting, all those little lines all over your walls. Shel Pellegrin with Business of France 24.